Hi, I'm Tony Fadell, and this is Cars and Culture with Jason Stein.
If we wanted to identify an individual who is the creator of culture, maybe an ambassador of a change in the way that we as humans have organized our lives, or even just organized our music collection or the temperature in our homes, it would be this man, Detroiter Tony Fadell. Welcome in.
Hey, Jason, great to be here. It's wonderful to be talking to a Detroiter in a Motown, audience. It's awesome.
Well, it's fantastic to have you on the program. You have a new product out, and we've heard of some of your previous ones, but this one requires no installation, Tony.
And no power, no anything. No power. It's right. Old school. It's very old school.
You've gone old school. We've gone from music files and phones and Nest units to a book. You've written a book, Build, an unorthodox guide to making things worth making. So you're an author now. Yeah. How does that feel?
Well, now it feels pretty good. I'll tell you, in April, May, when the book, just before the book came out, when it came out, I was pretty nervous, right? This is an all analog technology. It's only me. It's my name on it. All the products I've done, I've obviously been able to lead a lot of things, but they were team efforts. And in this case, it was also a very small team, but it was a team effort. But this is really me. This is my words. And, when it goes out there, I can't hide from it. So I was nervous, but it has gotten such great reception around the world. And I'm getting notes, emails, direct messages, everything every day, almost every hour. And it's really feels great. And now the book's going to be coming out in over 22 languages in the coming months.
Amazing.
So yeah, so literally this has all been since May, and it's my first time at bat. And so far so good.
What'd you learn during the experience?
Oh, wow. So Build, it was a 2-year effort. It was very cathartic. I was able to go back in the 30, 35 years, depending on how you count, over my career, and got to go over a lot of, triumphs, but mostly I would say 80% was all about the failures and process them, especially the latest failures. So this book is it's very raw. I told it like it is. I did not pull punches, and really trying to help people. Literally I wrote it as if I was 20 years old again, and what would I want to know? What were the things that my mentors have taught me over time, right? The only reason why I'm here today talking to you and your audience is because I had mentors who helped me along the way, combined with lots of hard work, of course, but mentors at those key junction points in my career that could give me feedback on me as a person, as a leader, the things I was doing. And if it wasn't for those people helping to reduce the noise and really get to what mattered, you can go off in all kinds of crazy directions. So this book is really to honor them. And I call it a mentor in a box. And just taking all those lessons learned from my mentors, like my grandfather, right there in garages in Detroit, a bowling alley in Detroit, yes. and then working with Steve Jobs and Bill Campbell and a whole host of people in between, trying to take those lessons and reflect them back so that people can digest them and use them really in any kind of part of a career. So whether you're trying to build yourself, your career, a team, a product, a company, what have you, it's all about human nature. And so that was what was really interesting, was that I got to pull back and go, wait a second, all the things I learned are really about human nature. This book's not about bits and bytes and technical stuff. It really isn't. It's just about tried and true things. And the reason why I call it unorthodox is because in Silicon Valley, the orthodoxy of Silicon Valley is to be unorthodox. In other words, you go and you have to use the latest technology, go and disrupt and everything else. This book is unorthodox because it speaks to the orthodox of human nature. In other words, it's so counter to the way people think in Silicon Valley and the tech business. And we just get back to the humanity of it all and go to things, things that have been in our culture for centuries. And so it's just bringing those things back up to light and stripping away the technology, actually.
It's a bit of a blueprint, if you will, for those who need to navigate this kind of world. I found it interesting that you write an entire chapter about quitting, and you talk about when things aren't going well, that sometimes you have to quit, and you quit Apple 3 times.
Yeah.
What's the
Yeah.
lesson you're trying to impart there?
What I'm trying to say is, if you're in a system that is not helping to create something to better the world, you're not on the right mission, or you're not going about it the right way, or there's a politics getting in the way of the mission. It's just all kind of, the mission's window dressing, and everybody's just kind of infighting and what have you, or we're not going along the right path. Put your money where your mouth is. If you don't like it, stand up for it and be the change you wish to see. And if people don't want to see that, and you go all the way to the top and say, no, this is not right, I'm going to tell you why, and you're not giving me any good reasons why, well, guess what? This isn't a place for me, because this isn't going to work. Because I've suffered before where I sat in roles that I didn't like for sometimes too long. And because I thought it was going to change, and it didn't. And the best way to make the change is to make it happen yourself, right? That's what I've done with the products, but you also have to do it with the cultures that we live in and we create. And so to me, that's really a part of it. A lot of companies, look at SpaceX. If those people didn't quit, Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all of these different rocket companies, they wouldn't have started SpaceX. And the same thing goes with all these electric vehicle companies, Rivian or where have you, Tesla in some cases, right? People left where they were in because they said it was wrong. They were trying to fight for doing EVs or a new way of manufacturing, whatever. And they left to go build the thing that they thought was right. And they go to change the world. That's what I've always found, is you might learn something, but if you can't do it at the place you want to do it at, well, then you're going to have to go somewhere else, or create that culture and create that team to build it, to realize the mission you really want to see.
A fascinating piece of it too, related to management style and just being in the workplace, was really an entire chapter devoted to, I know we're on satellite radio here, but I'll just say a-holes.
Yep.
And that was a term that's been used to describe you. There was a headline that basically said, "Don't call Tony Fadell an a-hole. He prefers to be mission driven." But you do make a distinction between being mission driven, a mission driven a-hole, and a controlling a-hole.
Right.
And the important thing there is someone who's mission driven has a why behind what they're doing, not necessarily doing things because they want it done their way. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. You're doing it for a bigger purpose. You're mission driven. You're trying to manifest something in the world that's never seen, right? You're revolutionizing. You're trying to change something in a dramatic way. And a lot of people, as long as you are not criticizing and judging people, but their work, that's okay. You can judge their work. You can't judge the person. Now, they might not be the right person for the job, and you need to, change things, but you can't demean people, right? And so when you're all about the mission and you're all about trying to drive your team, and the team wants you to drive to make sure we complete that mission, you need to be critical about things, especially all the things that touch the consumer that really matter, not the little micromanagement stuff. That's all about boosting up your ego. No, we're talking about the things that matter for the customer, whether that's an end consumer, another business, or what have you. You need to look at that level of detail. We see that in many of the autos in the car companies today. There's a whole new thing. If I look at it, Jim Farley, he's a great guy, right? But he is mission driven, right? Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford. If you look at how much change is happening in that company just over the last 2 years, 3 years, it's incredibly impressive. He's moving mountains. And yes, I'm sure a lot of people are like, God damn it, he's an asshole. He just laid off people, blah, blah, blah. They're all pissed off. But he's on the right mission to do the right thing to save the company and save lots of jobs. And it's hard work. And he's going to be criticized over and over, but it's not because he's doing it for his ego. He's doing it for the right reasons for the company to survive well beyond him, right? And taking it beyond into the next generations. so that it can live on and be, a Motown icon like it always has been.
Let's talk about your relationship with Steve Jobs, who comes up in the book quite a bit. Where was he on that spectrum?
He was much more on the mission-driven side than the ego side. I knew him in version, I guess you could say 2.0 of him.
2.0, right?
Yeah, I heard at General Magic, I was at a company called General Magic, my first job out of school, really, and that had that we were trying to create the iPhone 15 years too soon. And I would hear stories about Steve 1.0 when he first started Apple, and when he was driving the Mac team, and these people were essentially the creators of the Mac, and he was driving. I heard all kinds of crazy ego-driven stories. Okay, but then when I started working with him in the early 2000s, he had already gone through his next experience, so next computer that failed, that was ultimately bought by Apple. He was fired in a way from Apple. So he had a lot of different humbling experiences. And when we were working together, he was very, very mission driven, whether it was the rebirth of the Mac, the iPod, obviously the iPhone as well. He was very, very much mission driven. And you hear a lot of those stories, but people don't delineate the difference. They just say he was tough, and they all go, oh, he was just an a-hole. Oh, excuse me, a-hole. and you have to really understand the motivations behind it, and not just, he's tough and he's just, making me feel bad. And usually that's because your ego is getting affected by some way, because your work is being judged or being pushed to the limits. And he's seeing something in individuals that they can go beyond the limits they've self-imposed. And that's the great thing about mission-driven people, is that they see stuff in you, they believe in you, and they push you beyond your own barriers, and so you might hate it. You're like, oh, I can't stand him. But you wake up 2, 3, 5, 10 years later and you go, wow, that was an incredible experience. It was very difficult, but I learned so much and I did so much. And so you have to really understand what is the motivations, because these driven leaders, typically the good ones, are going to be mission driven, and they are going to push you to be a better professional.
And in fact, your relationship was as turbulent as it was productive. And I found it interesting that you even had moments where he was incredibly personal. He wanted to talk to you about family and life and kids and things of that nature. So as driven as he was, and as mission driven as he was, he also had that other side, which you also write about in the book, which is a caring, nurturing side as a manager. Two very different things.
Two very different things. And you have to know when you're going to be one or the other, depending on the time of day and who you're talking to and the situation. And he, like I said, version 2.0 of him, from my point of view, that's what he did. And he was being a master. And I got to watch him and emulate him in certain aspects. So it was really rewarding and eye-opening.
Tony, as a child growing up in the Detroit area, did you ever envision that you would have the kind of technological or cultural impact that you've had on, let's say, cars and culture?
Let's see. No, I was just a kid. So I wasn't, all I was doing was banging away in the garage, building soapbox derby racers with my grandfather, repairing lawnmowers, gardening, working around the house in Chandler Park, section of Detroit, and a Hamtramck as well. So no, I never thought that way, but my grandfather was the person who set me on the path to build. I would go to that Van Dyke Lanes bowling alley and get in the basement with him, and he would have all his tools, and we would go and fix the bowling alley, and we would go and fix houses and all these kinds of things. And this was from the age of 3 and 4, with my brother also, who was a younger brother, who still lives in the Detroit area. We would go and fix things and build stuff. And he put those tools in our hands. We were so young. And he goes, look, everything around us, humans made. You're a human. You can make things too. You can repair them. You can make them better. Don't be daunted. And he empowered us. and gave us agency to go and create when we were, single digit ages, little kids, much to the chagrin of my grandmother, my mom, and my mom, when we're using power tools at the age of 4 and 5, we could get seriously hurt. So that's the wonderful thing that, Detroit gave. And it was a Depression era garage. He saved every nut and bolt and every spring and screw and whatever it was all there. And it was just a great playground to grow up in and learn.
Your father was a sales executive with Levi Strauss Company. Fascinating.
Genes. Yeah, genes.
Yeah, genes. You had good genes.
I had great fashion growing up, I'll tell you that.
You had good genes.
I got a great sense of fashion from him, and I got to get the latest stuff in the 70s, because in the 70s, Levi's was the thing, right?
Sure.
It was even black market currency in Russia back in the 70s. So we were, my brother and I were the styling kids at school.
You discovered computers when you were 12 years old and caddied at a local golf club to raise money to buy your first Apple II, amazingly.
Yeah, Apple II, Country Club of Detroit,
Country Club of
CCD,
Detroit.
right there in Grosse Pointe Farms. I would, I'd literally walk there or bike there and then do my, caddy each day to try to make as much money as I could. So, and my grandfather would match it. So he said, whatever I did in the summer, he would match and help me get the Apple II. He never touched a computer. He didn't even know what one was, but he saw that I was enamored by it. And he saw it was a tool, just like his hammer, his saw, what have you. And he was like, okay, if this is what you really want, we're going to go figure this out for you. And it was, it just set me off on an amazing path. So,
and you were perusing Macworld in your spare time and dreaming of working with the team responsible for creating the computer. I mean, you studied computer engineering at the University of Michigan, but could you have imagined that you would be at the epicenter of a cultural revolution with the development of the iPod?
Well, I will say that I thought I was at the center of a cultural revolution at General Magic. So when I was surrounded by my heroes, we were creating something that the world was convinced, they didn't even see it yet, but they were convinced that we were going to take over Microsoft and we were going to be the next hottest thing in the world at General Magic. And so I had drank that Kool-Aid and I was all in at the age of 21, 22, working day and night. And there's a movie all about it. And I recommend that your listeners, viewers, tune into the General Magic, the movie, because it's an incredible story about failure and resilience and about creating the iPhone 15 years too soon. But that's where I thought we were going to change the world. So I got tempered when it was the biggest failure of the time. Most people have never heard of the company, but it was the biggest failure of the time in the tech world. And it literally changed my way of thinking that not everything was going to be a success. And for 10 years, during and after General Magic, it was an utter failure for me. It was all learning experiences till the iPod came out. And I was hopeful the iPod would be success, but I never wanted to convince myself it was, because of the disaster that was General Magic. Because it kind of, when you start inhaling that exhaust, your own exhaust, you can really get off track fast, and you can automatically assume you're going to be successful. So for me, I'm always, let's do the right thing. Let's hope for success, but let's never get ahead of ourselves and think we are a success. Even after the first iPod or the iPhone shipped, or even the first Nest product shipped, you cannot rest on your laurels.
One of your principles is to make mistakes, and this is a universalism that is often not adopted by entrepreneurs, or maybe not as accepted as well as it could be. But making and correcting mistakes takes leadership, and sometimes you'll only learn by going through the product process, making those mistakes. And you say it sometimes takes 3 versions of something to get it right. And a lot of companies fail or have a crisis of confidence because they try to get data for something that doesn't exist, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that, you encapsulated well. There's the first thing is, whenever you're doing anything revolutionary, anything really new, there's no experts in the world for it. You might have expertise and you have people with lots of expertise, but we're all coming together in a new domain to do a new thing that we've never done before. So it's going to happen that you're going to fail. Just try to limit those failures, and you're going to need time to work out those things first inside the team and what you're building and fix those things. But then when you get out to market, fix the things after the customer experiences. And then you have to figure out how to make the right business, right? To make sure the business works. So first is getting the right team, everybody together to make something that's hopefully impactful and important, then fine tuning it for the customer, then fine tuning it for the business world. And as you rightly said, people have crisis of confidence, especially in big organizations, and it takes multiple years to go through these versions, right? And so in most corporate worlds, maybe CEOs last 4-6 years, and you don't even have time to go through all of those different versions. And then somebody decides, the new executive decides to kill it, right? And the reason being is because they all want data. They forget that when you make the first product in a new category that you're creating, you're using your opinion. There is no data you can get. You can get insights. You can get little gleams of data to help you make better risk-adjusted decisions. But they're a lot of the biggest ones are coming from your gut, the things that you think customers are going to respond to. You can't just go ask a customer, and this, what I learned from Philips and then saw really firsthand with Steve Jobs, is you just can't go ask people what they want. They don't know what they want.
They don't know what they want.
Just like in cars. I want a buggy that goes, or horses that go faster, right? As opposed to a car. So you really, and look at all the revolution and then the evolution of the auto in the first, decades of the auto. It's changed so many times, and we're seeing that now with the electric mobility revolution, right? Not just cars, but 2 wheels and 3 wheels, all those things.
Sure.
We're going through a massive Cambrian explosion again, like it was in the early 1900s in the car industry. Now we're seeing it in the mobility industry.
I had this conversation recently at the Detroit Auto Show related to EVs, and one automaker executive actually compared it to the development of the iPhone and the transition from BlackBerry to iPhone, because most consumers, most users couldn't imagine that they couldn't have a keyboard that was on a phone.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, what was being created was a better screen that also had a keyboard. And after that realization, the rest is history. The percentage of iPhone users out there versus BlackBerry today.
Yeah, well, it's BlackBerry, it's zero, right? And really, it's because BlackBerry it wasn't just because it was a better screen, but it was a different target audience. And it was actually it was a general purpose device as the iPhone. BlackBerry, at the most point, it was mostly a messenger. It was an okay phone. People use it as a phone, but it was a better SMS machine in a way, instead of using the 12-key keyboard. So it was really a messaging machine for productivity. It wasn't for business people. It wasn't a consumer device that had music and videos and internet browsing and everything else. It was really meant for this corporate world. And so, looking back, now we see that. But at the time, everyone's like, Crackberry is it. You got to do that. And, in the book and Build, I go through the, kind of the story of how that had to go down inside of Apple. And it was not always pretty to finally decide that it was going to be the keyboard, a screen-based keyboard as opposed to a physical one.
So what is your opinion on where we are today and how far things have come? Because the iPod effectively became the iPhone. And you said you were early on the iPhone anyway, 15 years too early. Tell me what you mean by that. Was the world not ready for it?
Well, look, if we think about it, the iPhone, all right, it has changed so much. It's changed the world, right? But it had to be at the right place and time when society understood the need for it. So that's one thing. The second thing is the technology had to be enabled, and then there had to be enough technology, just close enough that you could put those things, the pieces together to make a product. And the society, at least certain people in the society, had to have enough of the problems or understand enough of the problems that the iPhone was solving to bring that together. So at General Magic, we had an incredible team, the smartest people at the time. This was in the early 90s, but that was before the internet. That was before Wi-Fi. That was before mobile data, really before mobile phones. Most people didn't even have mobile phones, and they were only analog, and they were very expensive then. People didn't really have email in the early 90s. They didn't have messaging. They didn't have social media. They didn't have online ticketing and downloadable games, all of these things. We were solving that problem in early 1990. So think about it. I didn't even have those problems. I didn't have a mobile phone. I didn't know we were just solving because we knew at some point it was the right thing to do, but the technology wasn't right. And the second thing is, because we didn't have the technology or early internet days or music or digital music days or anything, people didn't understand even the problems we were trying to solve. Even if we could solve them with the technology, they didn't understand the problems we were trying to solve. So we were in this sandbox, basically impressing the geek next to us.
Yeah, on your own.
On our own, and maybe it was going to be right or wrong. It took 15 years after we had the internet. We knew what online travel was. We knew what online shopping was, messaging, all this stuff. So, because in 2007, what were we doing? You had a mobile phone for communications. You had an iPod for digital media, and then you had your computer for digital productivity. A laptop. And you had to carry all three of these things around. And there were certain people, mobile professionals and other people, who had all three things. And then the iPhone came and it was like, we're solving all of this in this one thing that fits in your pocket, right? And so they knew that the problem is we had enough of the technology. It was close. It wasn't great yet, but iPhone 1, just like I said, it wasn't until iPhone 4 that things really started taking off, that it all came together, and then it became the revolution as we know it today.
And then nobody needed an iPod.
And then well, that was the other major thing, which was cannibalizing the real only growing product at Apple in the early 2000s. The thing that would actually brought glory back to Apple, which was the iPod. And we had to kill it to allow the iPhone to succeed. So that's that was very daring, just as much as the original first iPod and committing to that.
What do you remember about those days, about making those decisions?
They were existential. So for Apple in 2001 with the iPod, I wasn't even clear I was going to go. I was a contractor. So I was contracted, and I put together the first 6 weeks, designed, the basics of the iPod in the first 6 weeks as being a contractor. But then Steve's like, you're going to come on and build this thing for us and run the team. And I was like, no, I don't think so. Apple had more or less only 1% market share in the computer market in the US only. There was no Apple retail. There were no retailers, Best Buy, all the different, weren't even carrying Apple products in the stores. Apple had $500 million in debt, $250 million in the bank. It was luckily break even depending on the quarter. So to want to say you're going to go and I had 10 years of failure in Silicon Valley, to say I'm going to go work night and day for a company that's failing at why should I go do this? So that was the first thing. So it was existential for Apple to say, oh my God, we got to do iPod because we can't get the Mac to move anymore because Microsoft and Intel was just too dominating at the time. And then ultimately moving forward, and then so that started to work out, and iPod was over 50% of revenue at Apple, and it was a much cheaper product than the other products for many quarters at Apple. Right. So that was one phase. So, I obviously did the iPod and everything else. But then when it came to the iPhone, we started seeing cell phones at the time started to adopt iPod-like capabilities, doing digital music. And then we were like, people aren't going to carry one product with them. Is it going to be an iPod, or is it going to be a phone? And if the phone adopts these technologies, it could be over. So that was another existential thing where we're finally getting wind at our backs. Things are taking off. People are, Apple brand's getting, polished up again. And people are like, ooh, what's going on at Apple? Now we have to take that serious decision to now kill off, or start to kill off, and build something that's going to be fully competitive with the iPod. And obviously that was a big decision. It was the right decision. It took 2.5 years to figure out what the right way to solve the equation would be. And obviously it was the iPhone, but it worked.
As we sit here today in 2022, and you reflect back on this now, because you have room to reflect on it. And to your earlier point, there are moments when you now can reflect and understand some of the twists and turns and the learnings. Are you just amazed at how it all developed?
Oh, yeah, very much so. We worked very hard. We worked incredibly hard. We had a team of people who were geniuses, right? And they really wanted to see this thing exist. And so we did it, and we never rested on our laurels. We literally pushed 18 generations of iPod, for me, 3 generations of iPhone, to make sure we got to that place where it was there. And then you look back and you go, my God, we changed the world so dramatically. And now, to me, it's incumbent on me now to make sure that these technologies that we create, that we change the world with, also we can create unintended consequences. Such as we're seeing digital screen addiction,
Screen
digital
time,
device
right?
addiction, screen time.
You've been outspoken about that.
Very much so, much to the chagrin of Cupertino. I had a lot of friends there who were calling me going, what are you doing, Tony? Stop this. Stop going on TV and talking about digital screen addiction and things like that. I'm like, no, this is incredibly important. We can bring information to the world with these amazing devices, but we can also do harm. Not that we're doing the harm, but they can be a conduit for it. And we need to make sure it's imperative that the creators also watch over those things, because we don't know what's going to happen to them. And we go, when they're out in the wild, and we go and put in the right guardrails and things of that nature to make sure we do the right thing for our society, so we can have healthy individuals, healthy societies, so we can have healthy markets that people want to buy these products in the future.
You yourself actually turn off notifications for everything at times, and in social settings, you make sure your phone is not on the table or in your pocket, ironically enough. But what do you say to those who suggest that the reason that today's younger generation does not drive is that it doesn't have to? That the mobile phone and its access to the world delivers the kind of transportative fantasy and freedom that the car did for the boomer generation. You subscribe to that?
Absolutely. Look, my son is 15, and he hasn't even got, I've taken him out on a track before, but he has no interest in getting a car and getting ready when he turns 16 in just a couple of months to be able to go and drive. He's like, okay, I'm just going to get an Uber or a Lyft or whatever it is, because it's freedom for them, right? So that's how he was learning when he was 10 or 12 or whatever. And he's like, okay, I'm going to just do this, or deliveries come, or Amazon, or what have you. And so it's a different way of thinking. And if I think about it, we love cars, right? We love the culture of cars, but also our planet can't survive with all of these cars. We can't have all of these. We see the massive lanes of traffic. Every year we add another lane, and we still have more traffic. What's so nice about the mobile phone revolution, the smartphone revolution, is it makes us rethink mobility, not just from I'm going to replace my own car with something that's going to be either self-driving or driven by a person like a Lyft or an Uber, but it allows us to also go, wait a second, I'm going to take a 2-wheel scooter, or I'm going to take a 2-wheel, e-Vespa or something else. And allows us to think about how we change our lifestyle from what we grew up with our parents. And I'm living here in Paris, and the amount of mobility solutions, and I've been here 7 years, the amount of mobility solutions we have on 2, 3, 4 wheels is so dramatically different. And it has changed so much over the last 5 years. It's astounding to me. And I love living in a place where it's so dynamic, especially around mobility, because it's such a love of mine, growing up in the car culture of Motown.
Well, and in fact, the Paris mayor in recent years has been very out front and outspoken about wanting to eliminate vehicles in the city center. And of course, following a lot of other dense urban environments around the world and across Europe about congestion charges and things of that nature.
We have them in London now, right?
Correct.
In many cities around the world. And it's even come to Silicon Valley now. Truth be told, I love cars. I have lots of cars, but I don't even own a car. And this might sound like a heretical talk. I don't even own a car here in Paris.
Yeah, sure. How do you feel about creating, introducing, and delivering all of the devices that you have to help humankind? Do you feel responsible, delighted, guilty?
I'd say delighted, responsible.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say guilty, perhaps. I would say concerned, for the unintended consequences, and that we make sure we go after it. But if we didn't have those technologies, we wouldn't have the world we live in today. Just imagine if we did not have the smartphone and the smartphone revolution for COVID. So during COVID, let's say COVID happened in 2005, 6, even 7, 2007, but just when the smartphone revolution started. Imagine the world of living through COVID without that smartphone revolution, when we didn't have deliveries, when we didn't have really Amazon or these other things to help us in our contained environments. I think it would have been an incredible disaster, and COVID been even worse, because everyone would have had to still go about their daily activities the way they were doing them. So yeah, I think that these important changes that came through these revolutions that I got to be a part of are incredibly important, and I wouldn't want to change the world. And so I don't feel guilt, but I do think we need to continually improve them and make sure they're not damaging individuals and societies.
You mentioned that you're a car guy, Tony. What have you owned?
Oh God, what have I owned? Let's see. I had my first I think it was a 78 Monte Carlo that was handed down by my grandfather that I drove in the early 80s. But I have the latest edition Ford GT, the previous generation Ford GT. I have a 69 Bronco, fully restored Bronco.
Those
I have a 59 El Camino, that's undergoing right now a electrification. I'm so into electrifying old cars.
Are you?
Oh, are you kidding me? When you go to Pebble Beach, you've been to Pebble, right? You were just doing all your episodes in Pebble.
Correct.
You go, well, these are gorgeous cars. They're worth millions. You're like, you touch them, you're like, oh, they're sumptuous. You're like, oh, it just gets your heart racing. And then when you see these old cars and they start them up and they belch black smoke, and you're like, this is worth $10 million. And it might sound slightly good. And then you look at it and then the soot is getting all over the car that's perfectly pristinely clean. You're like, what the WTF? I'm not paying 10 million for that. And then I'm worried about it running. I'm seeing, when you're in Monterey and you see all those cars broken down on the side of the road, it reminds me of the 70s growing up. You saw broken down cars up and down the road. You don't really see that anymore.
Not usually.
Unless it was a big flat or, but it's very rare compared to what you were in the 70s. And in the 60s, 50s, I could imagine it was even worse. So why do I want to own a incredibly multi-million-dollar beautiful automobile if I can't use it?
That's a fair point. It's a fair point.
So I think we're going to see an incredible revolution in the cars and culture world for people who really like older cars, because for so many reasons, because it's like the parts are going to be harder to get, it's going to get more expensive. So you're going to see a lot of these, I wouldn't say the top end, the perfect ones that you don't want to touch. You want a new old stock. It's got to be perfect. But then there's these mid runners, that you fixed over time. They were dense and rust. You're going to want to electrify those more than go and try to rebuild them and find all the parts from around the world. I think that's for certain people, but I think the next generation, especially the younger generation of car enthusiasts, are going to see this more and more.
You've owned an R8 before, right? An Audi R8.
Oh, R8 V10 manual. I have the original all-road manual, 6-speed. I still have. So I got FJ40 all original FJ40
from the 70s.
Yeah, 70s.
So you clearly like gasoline engine vehicles as well. Do you like? I mean, anybody who likes a V10 likes gas engine vehicles.
Well, look, that was all I could buy at the time. But frankly, when I see when I see the latest cars now and it's all got a gas engine, I could care less.
Okay.
Chiron, forget it. I don't care. I care about the latest and greatest technology. I don't care about the latest and greatest of the old technology. I care about the latest and greatest of the newest technology.
What do you like in the EV space now that's brand new?
Well, I'll tell you, the iconic 5.
Sure.
I'll tell you, that is pretty damn cool for the price point, for where it's at. It feels like, to me, it's the new hot hatch.
Yep.
I think, like, geez, you got to give it to Hyundai. You got to give it to the Koreans. Like
Genesis,
they're
yeah.
doing a pretty good job with the EV stuff. You know, the Japanese are out to lunch, but the Koreans are doing a pretty good job. So I have to give them that. I'm liking what, Jim's doing at Ford. You know, the F-150, the new one, like that's incredible. The new, what else do I like? I have Tesla, of course.
You like
right?
Lucid?
Oh yeah, I was in a Lucid. Actually, a couple of friends of mine who did iPhone and iPod, they worked for me. They're actually in charge of those programs. It's funny that the iPod and iPhone teams, even some people from Nest, are leading the teams at Rivian, leading the teams at Lucid. They're at Tesla. It's so wonderful to see all of these, because we were all fanatics, together. We would always talk about our Audi this, because RS6 Avant. I love the RS6 Avant, right? We would go and do all this stuff, and now they're all doing doing great things and revolutionizing the auto industry. So that's wonderful to see.
What does Tony Fadell think about Elon Musk and what Elon Musk has done?
Well, Elon's a friend, so I have to say that. I think it's incredibly impressive. You have to respect all of the things he's done. What he's done was so hard. We talked together in 2008, and he wanted me to come and work with him back then, and I didn't because I wanted to do iPhone and the Nest. But to watch where he was and watch what's materialized, SpaceX, Starlink, and now battery factories and new ways of doing manufacturing, and everybody counting them out. You have to just be absolutely in awe of what he has been able to manifest in this world and change the whole auto industry. Look, everybody in the auto industry, it's done. The EV transition is done in the mindset of the auto world. It's gonna happen. It's happening. It's what have you. Who did that? Who singularly did that? We were talking about GM tried, right? All these people tried, but probably not maybe like General Magic was the society wasn't right, the technology wasn't right, all that stuff wasn't right. He hit it, and he stayed in there, and there was so many naysayers, and so you have to give him credit for that.
Yeah, he would fit well into your book, wouldn't he?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What do you see as the main stumbling block for humankind when it comes to widespread autonomous vehicle adoption?
So look, when it comes to AVs, I have been a naysayer for the longest time. I still am to a certain regard. I know they're going to happen, okay? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But it's also what and how. When I saw what was going on in 2015, even 2012 around this stuff, Sebastian Thrun, who did the first self-driving car for the DARPA Grand Challenger, he's a close friend. I watched all of those things happen, and I was like, I understood the technology, the computers, the sensors, all this stuff. We are still at the we're not even at version 1.0 of this stuff. We're still in this, kind of general magic moment. And we're trying to figure out what it is. But people are pitching, and especially in 2015, 2017, oh my God, we're going to have all this. It's going to come in 2 years. I was like, this is utter BS. And there's a whole group of us that get together. And I called BS on this in 2016. I said, this is stupid. Like, yes, we need to do it, but stop wasting all this time and money. And Uber was in it, and Lyft was building stuff. I was like, this is just ridiculous, because they were like, oh, the AV is coming fast. If you knew about the systems, if you really see it, we're lucky to see what we're seeing today. And even then, it is not the vision what we've been planted in our heads. To me, you have to crawl before you walk before you run. And people think it's just going to take over everything. I think, those dedicated kind of city shuttles or campus shuttles, these other things, they can do that because they can work within restricted bounds, and you can, unleash them as you get better and better capabilities. But to think that we're going to have self-driving, full self-driving, as we were told, and, all due respect to Elon, we're not there. We're not even close to there for the way that we envision the Jetsons scenario of, things that just, drive or even fly around with us without us interacting with them.
Can transportation be as emotive when it's autonomous as when we have to physically drive cars?
emotion, and I think the cars come when you're in a car. It's interesting to be driven fast by someone else. Like you've been in, I'm sure, a F1 car or a trainer car
Sure.
or F Formula Ford or something, a trainer, and
Yep.
you get driven around by a professional and you're like, oh my God, it's great. But you can only do that so many times. And then, but it's an exhilarating experience because it's very different. Here, what we're talking about is something very safe. It's not going to have a personality and you have no control over it. So I think it's going to be much more of a mundane, it's just like getting on a bus. Like, is that a motive? No. You want the
Depends
control.
who's next
And
to you.
it's when you have the control and and that's great. And I love driving around a track. I hate driving in traffic.
That's true. I guess it depends who's next to you. If the bus Finally, a couple of things, Tony. Look into your crystal ball. What does the transportation world look like 2 decades out, 50 years out?
Oh, geez. 50 years, forget it. I've learned that technology has been changing and accelerating its change since I've been a kid. So I can't even predict what it's going to look 50 years. 10 years, I hate to do predictions, but look, I think we're going to see a much more multimodal kind of way we get around. 2, 3, and 4 wheels. I'm not so sure about flying cars. I think they're big boy toys. They might be good for emergency services and certain things, but I really don't believe in this whole EV toll thing. I think it's just a bunch of rich guys trying to, one up each other at the bar. But I do think micro mobility, medium mobility, and cars are all going to change. Buses, we're going to see smaller shuttles. We're going to see urban centers change dramatically, like we're seeing in Paris, where cars or anything that is either autonomous or driven by a person are going to be speed limited. They're going to have congestion pricing. You're going to see that they can't have any pollution. We're going to see, charging networks that are going to be incredible, probably wireless charging networks in many respects. In just 10 years from now, we are going to see incredible new things. Like when I was at Goodwood this year, 1/3 of the cars on the racing up the hill were electric.
Yeah.
Like you would never, like people are like, what?
Yes.
And everyone else is like, oh, I love hearing the sounds. And I'm like, Jesus, it's so much nicer. Like when I go to Formula E or I go to Goodwood and I can talk to people while we're, this, as opposed to yelling at each other and being worn out. So I think we're going to see less pollution in urban centers. We're going to see less noise in urban centers. We're going to see more noise restrictions. I think mobility is going to change dramatically, and you're going to see a lot less of the young youth buying cars, as we're already seeing. It's going to continue that way. And I think we're going to see revolutions from India, Southeast Asia, Africa, where the 2 and 3 wheelers are really taking off, electric, in China as well. That's it's going to move across the world in different continents, and we're going to see a lot more 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, electric versions in these urban centers.
Okay, so that's the crystal ball on transportation. Give me one more crystal ball moment on communication. How's that?
Communications?
Communication. iPhones.
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think you're never going to be disconnected again. Wherever you go, we're seeing, yes, this week, AST Mobile put a satellite in space that can talk directly to your handset and do all the same stuff, data, everything. It's even bigger than Starlink. So that's AST Mobile. So that's already coming. It's already up in space being tested. So I don't think there's going to be a time where we're going to be disconnected anymore. So that's a big thing. I think that, the way we're talking now, this is going to be the much more common than just the voice only way. So it's going to be the video conferencing. That's how the kids are growing up. And I think that my daughter, she has grown up with Siri and Amazon Alexa and these kinds of things. She didn't know how to read and write. My older boys, they didn't have Siri. They didn't have these voice assistants. So they were interacting the way we interact with our digital devices. My daughter, who couldn't read and write when she's 2 and 3, she learned how to use all these devices with voice only, right? It was incredibly empowering for her. And I was watching her use it. I was like, so when she's communicating only in voice, using all these things. So I think there's communications between people, and then there's communications between us and devices. And I think between us and devices, that's going to change more. But between each other, I think it's going to be very similar.
And somehow guys like us, car guys, and you're about to head off to Germany next week, but somehow car guys like us will find a track somewhere and spin 4 wheels and do burnouts and put the foot down on the accelerator, right?
Yeah, and it's going to probably most likely be EV.
Right.
Because it's faster. There's so many benefits to it. So I can't wait for the next generation of cars and culture and what's going to emerge from and mobility and culture. I guess you could say mobility and culture and what the youth do with it. I can't wait to see what the hot August nights looks like in the EV revolution and what the hot 2-wheelers are, whether that's a motorcycle or something smaller. I am so the opportunity and the revolution that's upon us now, and it's going to continue. I'm just so excited.
His new book requires no batteries, no installation. It's better than 1,000 songs in your pocket. It is 35 years in the field. It's called Build, an Unorthodox Guide to Making Things Worth Making. This has been a conversation worth having. Thank you so much, Tony Fadell.
Jason, great to spend time with you. It's always fun to take my passions and put them all together, especially, in Motown. So thank you for the time. I hope your audience enjoys it.
He is now living in Paris, but he's from the Paris of the Midwest, Detroit. Tony, thank you so much.
Detroit.
Thanks for being on the program.
Thanks.